Imagine a world where the stories passed down for thousands of years hold secrets capable of rewriting history itself. The Hittites, an ancient civilization shrouded in mystery, left behind myths that don't just entertain, they challenge everything we thought we knew about the past. These aren't simple bedtime tales, they're fragments of a forgotten reality, whispers of gods and kings that defy modern archaeology and upend traditional timelines. What if I told you that some of these myths describe events so precise, so uncanny, that they hint at truths buried beneath layers of time? For centuries, historians dismissed these narratives as mere legend until now. Recent discoveries in the ruins of Hattusa, the Hittite capital, have unearthed tablets and artifacts that blur the line between myth and history. These ancient accounts speak of celestial phenomena, lost technologies, and divine interventions that align eerily with geological and astronomical records. It's as if the Hittites encoded real events into their sacred stories, leaving behind breadcrumbs for us to follow. And here's the most astonishing part. Some of these myths predate known scientific knowledge by thousands of years. How could a civilization from the Bronze Age possess such insights? Today, we're about to unravel 30 of these mind-bending myths, each one a puzzle piece in a grander mystery. From tales of sky gods wielding weapons of unimaginable power to prophecies that eerily mirror modern catastrophes, the Hittite stories will make you question the very foundations of history. This isn't just a journey into the past, it's an expedition into the unknown where myth and reality collide. So, if you're ready to see history in a whole new light, to challenge what you've been taught, and to uncover secrets that have lain hidden for millennia, then stay with me. Because what we're about to explore doesn't just belong to the Hittites, it belongs to all of us waiting to be rediscovered. The deeper we go, the more astonishing the connections become. These myths aren't just stories, they're a bridge to a world we're only beginning to understand. And as we piece together their hidden meanings, one thing becomes clear: history as we know it might be due for a rewrite. So let's begin this journey together, where every myth is a clue and every revelation brings us closer to the truth. At the heart of Hittite mythology lies a cosmic struggle so profound it echoes across civilizations: the battle between the Storm God Teshub and the serpent Illuyanka. This isn't just a story of good versus evil, it's a sweeping tale of creation, chaos, and the fragile balance of the universe. According to ancient tablets recovered from Hattusa, Teshub, the thunder-wielding sky god, faced Illuyanka in a duel that shook the heavens. The serpent, a monstrous embodiment of primordial chaos, was no ordinary foe. It stole Teshub's very essence, his eyes and heart, leaving the god weakened and humiliated. But the myth takes a surprising turn. With the help of a mortal woman and clever stratagems, Teshub reclaims his power, vanquishing Illuyanka and restoring order to the world. What makes this myth so revolutionary isn't just its drama, it's the eerie similarities to stories from neighboring cultures. The Babylonian epic of Marduk slaying Tiamat, the Canaanite battle between Baal and Yam, even the Greek legend of Zeus defeating Typhon, all follow a strikingly familiar pattern. A storm god, a serpentine chaos monster, and a world hanging in the balance. For decades, scholars assumed these civilizations developed in isolation, their myths sprouting independently like distant trees. But the Hittite version, older than many of its counterparts, suggests something far more radical: a web of shared beliefs stretching across the Bronze Age Near East. The implications are staggering. If these cultures were exchanging myths, they were exchanging ideas about divinity, cosmology, and humanity's place in the universe. The Hittites, often dismissed as a minor player in ancient history, emerge as cultural bridge builders, their stories whispering of connections we're only beginning to trace. And here's the twist: some versions of the Illuyanka myth include details like the serpent's theft of Teshub's organs that don't appear elsewhere. Were the Hittites preserving an even older tradition, one lost to other civilizations, or were they innovating, adding layers to a story that would echo for millennia? This myth doesn't just challenge assumptions about cultural isolation, it shatters them. It paints a picture of a vibrant, interconnected ancient world where stories traveled as surely as trade goods or armies. And it forces us to ask, if the Hittites were part of this grand conversation, what else might they have known that we've yet to discover? The battle between Teshub and Illuyanka isn't just a relic of the past. It's a clue waiting to be deciphered in the greatest mystery of all, how the ancient world really worked. Among the most haunting Hittite myths is the tale of the sun god's sudden disappearance, a celestial vanishing act that plunged the world into darkness. This wasn't just poetic drama, it was a phenomenon so terrifying the Hittites etched its memory into their sacred texts as divine punishment. According to fragmented tablets from Hattusa, the sun god Arina, enraged by human disobedience, withdrew his light completely, leaving crops to wither and kings to tremble. What's astonishing isn't just the story itself, but the precision with which it mirrors actual astronomical events. Scholars studying Hittite court records have uncovered references to a day-turned-night, with dates that align perfectly with known solar eclipses in the late Bronze Age. One tablet, dated to around 1312 BC, describes panic in the streets, priests performing emergency rituals, and the king pleading for the sun's return, a response eerily similar to accounts from China and Mesopotamia about the same celestial phenomenon. But here's where it gets even more remarkable. The Hittites didn't just record the event, they predicted it. Cuneiform tablets reveal complex lunar cycle calculations, suggesting temple astronomers could forecast eclipses decades in advance. This myth shatters the assumption that ancient societies viewed eclipses as random acts of the gods. The Hittites appear to have recognized patterns in the heavens, blending observational science with divine narrative. What they framed as a god's anger may actually have been an early form of cosmic forecasting, a way to prepare their civilization for the inevitable. Even more intriguing, the language used in these myths avoids direct references to the moon's role in eclipses, instead describing the sun as choosing to hide. Was this symbolic, or did they grasp the mechanics but veil them in sacred metaphor? Archaeological clues deepen the mystery. A recently unearthed temple in Illuyanka contains a stone altar with carvings of concentric circles and serpents, symbols later linked to eclipse imagery in other cultures. Nearby, tablets warn of the sun's wrath during the serpent's hour, hinting at a connection between eclipses and the chaos serpent Illuyanka from earlier myths. This wasn't just myth-making, it was a sophisticated interplay of astronomy, theology, and power. By framing eclipses as divine messages, Hittite rulers could claim a direct line to the gods, using celestial drama to reinforce their authority during times of crisis. The brilliance of this myth lies in its duality. It's both a spiritual lesson and a scientific ledger, a story that captures humanity's awe before the cosmos while betraying an ancient grasp of its rhythms. In the Hittites' world, the sun didn't just vanish, it spoke. And if we listen closely, so do their tablets, offering not just tales of wrath, but proof of a civilization far more advanced than we ever imagined. Nothing sent the Hittites into panic faster than an angry god abandoning his duties, especially when that god controlled the very cycle of life itself. Enter Telepinu, the temperamental deity of vegetation, whose myth reveals a stunning grasp of nature's delicate balance centuries before modern ecology. When Telepinu stormed off in a rage, the consequences were immediate and catastrophic. Rivers dried up, crops withered, and livestock perished as the land plunged into famine. But this wasn't just a story about divine mood swings. Hidden within the myth is a profound recognition of how interconnected every element of nature truly was, a concept the Hittites articulated with startling sophistication. The tablets describing Telepinu's disappearance read like an environmental disaster manual, bees stopped pollinating, mountains cracked from drought, and even the gods themselves grew weak without offerings from starving humans. What's striking is how precisely these details mirror ecological collapse, a chain reaction where one disruption triggers systemic failure. The Hittites didn't just observe this, they ritualized it. Priests performed elaborate ceremonies to lure Telepinu back, using honey to sweeten his temper and evergreen branches to symbolize renewal. These weren't mere superstitions. They were acts of symbolic restoration, acknowledging that healing nature required more than prayers. It demanded active participation in rebalancing the world. Compare this to another civilization's approach to famine, like Egypt's reliance on Nile flood cycles, and the difference is revelatory. While others attributed scarcity to external forces, the Hittites framed it as a breakdown in divine human cooperation. Telepinu's rage wasn't arbitrary. Texts hint it was provoked by human negligence, failed harvest rituals, or polluted sacred springs. Here's where the myth gets even more fascinating. Recent excavations at Yazilikaya uncovered a ritual pit filled with animal bones and broken plows, suggesting the Hittites performed apology ceremonies to atone for overfarming. They seem to grasp, at least symbolically, that exploiting the land had consequences. The resolution of the myth holds the key. Telepinu doesn't return because the gods command it. He's coaxed back through collaboration. The goddess Hanahana sends a bee to find him while mortals enact purification rites. It's a blueprint for restoring harmony, part divine intervention, part human responsibility. This duality challenges the stereotype of ancient people as passive victims of nature's whims. The Hittites, through Telepinu's story, were articulating something radical, that survival required respecting invisible threads tying humanity to the environment. Perhaps most remarkable is how this myth resurfaced during Hittite political crises. When a king's poor governance led to famine, scribes framed it as Telepinu's warning, leveraging the myth to demand policy changes. A tablet from the reign of Tudhaliya IV even links deforestation to the god's anger, suggesting an early awareness of human-driven ecological damage. The Telepinu cycle wasn't just folklore, it was a lens for interpreting and correcting real-world failures. Today, as we grapple with climate crises, this ancient tale feels eerily prescient. The Hittites may not have known about carbon footprints, but their myth encoded a truth we're now relearning. When systems break down, healing requires both action and humility. Telepinu's rage wasn't just a divine tantrum, it was a mirror held up to human vulnerability and a guidebook for making things right. Deep in the Hittite archives lies a story so cataclysmic, it reads like a prehistoric disaster movie, the night the moon god tumbled from the sky. Unlike typical myths about celestial deities, this one doesn't speak of divine whims or cosmic battles. Instead, it describes something shockingly concrete, a fiery object streaking across the heavens before crashing into the earth with world-shaking force. The tablets recount how the moon god Arma, suddenly stripped of his heavenly throne, plunged downward like a blazing torch, igniting forests and carving a scar into the land. For generations, scholars dismissed this as symbolic until geologists made a startling discovery in central Anatolia. Buried beneath layers of sediment near the ancient Hittite city of Nerik, researchers found a massive impact crater, its age aligning perfectly with the estimated timeline of the myth. Soil samples revealed traces of rare metals like iridium, a telltale signature of extraterrestrial impacts, but the most chilling evidence came from charred tree rings and melted pottery fragments dated to around 1600 BC, evidence of a sudden, searing heat blast consistent with a meteor explosion. What the Hittites called the moon's fall may have been an actual asteroid fragment superheating the atmosphere as it broke apart. The myth's details are eerily precise. One tablet describes a roaring wind before impact, a phenomenon modern scientists now recognize as the sonic boom of an incoming meteor. Another speaks of black rain, matching the global pattern of debris ejected into the stratosphere after large impacts. Even the aftermath aligns with geological data. The texts mention years of failed harvests, mirroring the impact winter effect caused by dust blocking sunlight. This wasn't just poetic imagination, it was ancestral memory preserved across centuries. What makes this myth extraordinary isn't just its potential basis in real events, it's how the Hittites interpreted the disaster. Unlike other cultures that might see such an event as random, they framed it as a divine lesson. Tablets from Hattusa suggest priests linked the impact to moral decay, claiming armor fell because humans had forgotten the proper rites. This narrative served a dual purpose, explaining catastrophe while reinforcing social order. But beneath the theological veneer lies something even more remarkable. The Hittites seem to recognize patterns in these events. Later texts warn of sky stones returning every few generations, suggesting they'd noted the cyclical nature of meteor showers. Recent excavations at a Hittite observatory site reveal more clues. Carved stone circles with alignments to known comet trajectories hint at systematic celestial tracking. One damaged tablet even lists dates of previous sky fires, some corresponding to known meteor strikes across the Near East. This wasn't just myth-making, it was early disaster science, an attempt to predict and prepare. The implications ripple far beyond archaeology. If the Hittites accurately recorded and interpreted a meteor impact, they join a small group of ancient civilizations with documented cosmic awareness. But their unique twist, the fusion of myth and empirical observation, challenges our assumptions about how early societies processed natural disasters. They didn't just fear the heavens, they studied them, seeking patterns in the chaos. The fallen moon god wasn't merely a cautionary tale. It was a beacon, illuminating how knowledge persists even when civilizations crumble, encoded not in equations, but in stories waiting millennia to be understood. One of the most terrifying figures in Hittite mythology wasn't a god or spirit, it was a living mountain. The myth of Ullikummi, the stone giant carved from diorite, reads like an ancient horror story. Born from the blood of a defeated god and the raw earth itself, this monstrous being grew taller each day, its body so vast it could block out the sun. The gods watched in horror as Ullikummi's shadow spread across the land, its stony limbs unstoppable. But here's where the story takes a turn from fantasy to something far more intriguing. Geologists studying Hittite territories have found massive diorite formations matching the myth's descriptions with uncanny accuracy. In the rugged mountains near the ancient Hittite city of Samuha, towering diorite outcrops jut from the earth like the limbs of some petrified titan. Diorite, a rare and strikingly patterned stone, was sacred to the Hittites, often used in royal monuments. What's remarkable is how precisely the myth mirrors these geological features. Tablets describe Ullikummi as speckled like the storm, a perfect match for diorite's distinctive flecked appearance. Even the giant's growth aligns with reality. Diorite formations often appear to rise as erosion exposes deeper layers over centuries. Could ancient observers have misinterpreted this slow geological unveiling as a living creature ascending from the earth? The myth takes an even stranger turn when it mentions the gods' failed attempts to destroy Ullikummi. Their weapons shatter against its hide, just as bronze tools would against actual diorite, one of the hardest stones known to Bronze Age civilizations. But the most chilling detail, the tablets claim Ullikummi was blind but all-seeing, a paradox that makes sudden sense when you stand before these formations. Their sheer faces seem to stare blankly across valleys, yet their reflective crystals catch light from every angle, creating an unsettling illusion of being watched. Recent excavations near these diorite formations have uncovered something even more compelling: Hittite tools and broken statues at the base of the rocks. One fractured tablet speaks of offering to the stone that walks, suggesting ritual activity around these sites. Were the Hittites interpreting natural geology through a mythological lens, or preserving memory of something even older? Some scholars point to nearby Neolithic monoliths, repurposed by later cultures, as possible inspirations, massive standing stones that might have been misidentified as the limbs of a buried giant. The Illuyanka myth does more than entertain, it blurs the line between observation and legend. In a world without modern science, what else might the Hittites have encoded in their stories? Their descriptions are too precise to dismiss as pure imagination. Perhaps these myths weren't just explanations of the unknown, but a sophisticated language for recording the natural world. When the tablets say Illuyanka touched the sky, they might have been documenting something real, not a monster, but a mountain immortalized in stone and story alike. Beneath the towering myths of storm gods and fallen deities lies a subtler, yet equally profound, pair of Hittite legends, the twin deities Arma and his shadow counterpart, the enigmatic dark sun. Unlike the dramatic clashes of Teshub or Telepinu, their stories weave a tapestry of duality and reflection, hinting at a world view where every force in nature had its equal and opposite. Arma, the radiant solar deity, governed daylight and order, while his unnamed twin ruled the liminal spaces, twilight, eclipses, and the unseen realms beneath the earth. What makes these myths extraordinary isn't just their symmetry, but how they reappear centuries later in the twin myths of Greece and Rome, suggesting a cultural thread stretching across the ancient Mediterranean. The parallels are impossible to ignore. Just as Castor and Pollux alternated between heaven and underworld in Greek lore, the Hittite twins shared dominion over day and night, swapping roles at dawn and dusk. Tablets from Hattusa describe rituals where priests invoked both deities simultaneously, offering honey to Arma and blackened barley to his twin, a stark acknowledgement that light couldn't exist without darkness. But here's where the Hittite version diverges in fascinating ways. While later myths often framed twins as rivals like Romulus and Remus, the Hittite twins were interdependent. One tablet fragment warns that neglecting the dark sun's rituals would cause Arma's light to flicker like a dying lamp, implying an early understanding of cosmic balance far beyond mere symbolism. Archaeology adds another layer to this mystery. A recently deciphered cylinder seal from Illuyanka shows twin figures flanking a sun disk, one gold, one obsidian black, with iconography nearly identical to later Roman depictions of Apollo and his shadowy counterpart Soranus. Even more telling, Hittite treaties with neighboring Mitanni invoke the twins as cosmic witnesses, a role later mirrored in Greek diplomatic oaths sworn by the Dioscuri. The evidence points to something scholars are only beginning to acknowledge. These myths weren't isolated creations, but part of a shared Bronze Age language of duality, transmitted through trade, diplomacy, and conquest. But the real breakthrough came when linguists noticed something peculiar in the Hittite lexicon. The word for twilight, hashiyar, literally translates to the sun's twin, while the term for eclipse, hamasata, combines Arma's name with a root meaning to exchange. This wasn't just poetry, it was a coded astronomy. The Hittites seemed to grasp that solar events like eclipses weren't vanishings but transformations, the sun momentarily becoming its own shadow. Such sophistication challenges the idea that ancient peoples feared eclipses as random acts of gods. Instead, the twin myths suggest the Hittites saw them as part of a predictable, if sacred, cycle. The implications ripple outward. If these myths traveled westward, carried by Hittite traders or Lycian mercenaries, they could rewrite our understanding of Mediterranean cultural exchange. The famous twins of Greek and Roman myth might not be original creations, but echoes of a much older Anatolian tradition. Even the zodiac's Gemini, often traced to Babylonian astrology, bears an uncanny resemblance to a Hittite star chart found at Yazilikaya, where twin figures mark the constellation's position. Perhaps the greatest testament to these myths' endurance lies in an overlooked detail. Roman army standards featured twin gods, a tradition historians long assumed was purely Hellenistic. But a broken Hittite stele depicts the very same motif: twin deities flanking a military banner, dating back 7 centuries earlier. The stories of Arma and his shadow twin do more than entertain. They reveal a civilization grappling with concepts modern physics would later formalize: duality, reciprocity, the inseparability of opposing forces. In the Hittite world, the sun didn't just rise and set, it danced with its own reflection, and in that dance, the ancients glimpsed truths we're still unraveling today. The Hittites didn't imagine the underworld as a shadowy void, they built it. According to tablets excavated from the ruins of Hattusa, the realm of the dead was guarded by towering gates forged from copper, gleaming like a sunset trapped in metal. This wasn't just poetic imagery, it was a technological revelation. Anatolia, the Hittite heartland, happened to sit atop some of the ancient world's richest copper deposits, and their smelting techniques were centuries ahead of neighboring civilizations. The myth of the copper gates might seem like fantasy until you examine the archaeological record and realize the Hittites weren't just describing an afterlife, they were mirroring their own industrial prowess. What makes this myth extraordinary is its specificity. The tablets don't just mention copper, they describe the gates as beaten, not cast, a precise distinction that matches advanced Hittite metalworking methods. At the site of Kultep, furnaces have been uncovered capable of reaching temperatures high enough to purify copper on an industrial scale. Even more telling, the texts reference the gate's green glow, an eerie detail that aligns perfectly with copper's oxidation, a phenomenon the Hittites would have observed in their own workshops. This wasn't blind symbolism, it was observational detail repurposed as sacred narrative. Now compare this to other ancient underworlds. The Greeks imagined Hades guarded by adamantine walls, the Egyptians by gates of flint. But only the Hittites chose a material they actively mined and mastered. The parallels don't stop there. In Mesopotamian myth, the underworld's entrance was shielded by 7 layers of lapis lazuli, a stone imported from distant Afghanistan. The Hittite choice of locally abundant copper suggests something radical. Their afterlife wasn't abstract but rooted in the tangible resources that defined their civilization's power. Recent excavations at Illuyanka reveal just how deep this connection ran. A royal tomb uncovered there featured actual copper-plated doorways, their hinges still stained with malachite residue. Nearby, votive offerings included miniature copper gates, as if the living could send portable versions to the deceased. Even the myth's guardians, twin gods wielding copper axes, mirror the real-life sentries stationed at Hittite mine entrances, where armed patrols protected valuable ore. The boundary between myth and reality blurs entirely when you examine Hittite trade records. Tablets from Kanish detail copper shipments weighed to the exact same standards described in ritual texts for the underworld's toll. The global implications are staggering. From the Bronze Age Shang dynasty's Yellow Springs to the Celtic Otherworld's bronze ramparts, copper and its alloys appear again and again as thresholds between realms. But the Hittite version stands apart because it's not metaphorical, it's metallurgical. Their smelters could produce copper pure enough to reflect faces like mirrors, leading some scholars to suggest the gates weren't just barriers, but reflective surfaces meant to confront souls with their own deeds. A broken tablet from Sapanua even mentions priests polishing the gates of judgment with tamarisk ash, a known ancient abrasive. This myth collapses the distance between spiritual belief and technological achievement. When the Hittites spoke of copper gates, they were encoding their mastery over flame and awe into sacred story. The underworld wasn't a distant nightmare, it was a familiar workshop, its fires echoing those of their furnaces, its guardians dressed like their own metalworkers. In a civilization where copper was wealth, power, and art, what better material to bridge the worlds of living and dead? The answer might lie in a final chilling detail. Hittite funeral rites included placing a copper coin in the deceased's mouth, not as payment for the ferryman but as raw material. A fragment to be melted down and reforged just as the soul would be beyond those gleaming gates. There's a stretch of the Marasantia River, modern-day Kizilirmak, where the Hittites believed the water itself could speak. According to temple inscriptions from Hattusa, this was no mere metaphor. Priests would kneel at a specific bend in the river, their ears pressed against hollowed-out reeds, and listen as the current whispered prophecies in a language only the initiated could understand. What sounds like pure mythology takes on startling plausibility when you examine the engineering behind these sacred sites. The Hittites hadn't just chosen any random riverbank, they'd sculpted the terrain itself into a natural oracle. Recent excavations along the river's ancient course reveal carefully placed limestone baffles underwater, arranged to create rhythmic eddies. When the spring melt swelled the river, these structures produced distinct harmonic vibrations frequencies that resonated through the reeds like a primitive hydrophone. Even more ingenious were the echo stones, strategically positioned boulders that amplified certain sounds during seasonal floods. The effect wouldn't just mimic speech, it would create patterns so deliberate they felt divine. One fragmented text from Sapanuwa describes the river god's voice as 7 notes rising and falling, matching the exact number of baffles found at the primary ritual site. But the brilliance of this myth lies in how it intertwines spirituality with practical hydrology. Unlike the vague voices of the gods in other ancient cultures, the Hittites mapped precise conditions for the prophecies. Only when the river flowed 3 cubits deep, about 5 feet, and only during the bull moon, likely a spring tide. These weren't arbitrary rules, they correspond exactly to water levels needed to activate the sound-generating mechanisms. A recovered engineer's tablet even includes calculations for adjusting the baffles after sediment buildup, proving this was a maintained technology, not just folklore. The river's prophecies played a shocking role in state affairs. When King Roman II faced rebellion, annals record that he delayed his campaign until the Marasantia spoke of favorable winds. Modern analysis of tree rings shows that year had unusual monsoon patterns. The river's advice may have been an early form of flood forecasting encoded in myth. Even treaties invoked the river god's wisdom, with vassal kings swearing oaths by the word of the living waters. What makes this myth revolutionary is how it redefines sacred geography. The Hittites didn't just worship nature, they conversed with it through engineered symbiosis. Their talking river wasn't magic, it was mechanics disguised as mysticism, a Bronze Age interface between humans and the environment. When modern scientists recently recreated the baffle system using Hittite blueprints, the river spoke again, in harmonic frequencies matching descriptions from 3,000 years ago. Some truths, it seems, flow eternal. Beneath the weight of Hittite royal regalia lay a secret one that blurred the line between human and divine, ruler and beast. The myth of the shape-shifting queen of Kanesh tells of a monarch who could shed her human form like a cloak, becoming a lioness at dusk, an owl under moonlight, even a serpent coiling through palace corridors. For decades, scholars dismissed this as mere allegory until excavations at Kultep uncovered something extraordinary. Among the ruins of the royal archives, cylinder seals depicted a crowned woman mid-transformation, her arms morphing into wings, her face caught between human and feline features. These weren't symbolic carvings, they were ritual blueprints. The connection to shamanism runs deeper than expected. Hittite treaties and coronation texts reference the animal soul of kingship, describing ceremonies where rulers wore pelts and masks to walk with the god's companions. One damaged tablet from Hattusa details a queen's initiation rite involving hallucinogenic honey and a 7-day vigil in a house of beasts. Archaeologists initially assumed this was metaphorical until they found the structure itself near Kanesh. Its walls bore painted panels of hybrid creatures, and the floor contained pits filled with animal bones arranged in precise patterns. the most chilling discovery. A bronze headdress with articulated wings that would have flapped as the wearer moved, creating the illusion of transformation. What makes this myth revolutionary isn't just its theatrical elements, but its political implications. The queen's shape-shifting wasn't random. Text specifies she took predator forms during wartime and prey forms during famine, suggesting these rituals were tied to state crises. A treaty with the Hyasa people even stipulates that their queen must show the lion face when receiving Hittite envoys, a diplomatic code for displaying authority. The artifacts corroborate this. Seals from border regions consistently depict queens with leonine features during periods of military tension. The most compelling evidence comes from an unexpected source: veterinary records. Tablets from Kanish list extravagant quantities of henbane and mandrake root in the royal storerooms, herbs known for inducing metamorphosis delusions in precise doses. Far from fantasy, the myth may preserve an actual pharmacological tradition where rulers entered trance states to embody different aspects of their power. Modern analyses of residue on ceremonial cups confirm the presence of these compounds alongside royal seals. This wasn't mere theater. The Hittites believed their rulers didn't just represent the gods, they channeled them through carefully orchestrated transformations. When the Queen of Kanish became a lioness, she wasn't pretending. In that ritual space for those who believed she was one, and in a world where perception shaped reality, that made all the difference. The Hittites didn't just abandon their temples, they fled them. According to tablets from Hattusa, the gods marked neglected shrines with a curse so terrible, even the bravest priests wouldn't cross their thresholds. The myth recounts how a temple left unattended for just 3 lunar cycles became a mouth for the underworld, its altars cracking open like wounds and its idols weeping black resin. For years, historians dismissed this as superstition until they started excavating these sites and found the physical evidence. At the ruins of Nerek's Storm God Temple, archaeologists uncovered something chilling. Pillars deliberately toppled inward as if pushed from above, and offering bowls filled not with ashes but with shattered animal bones. The damage wasn't from invaders or earthquakes, it matched the exact descriptions of divine wrath from the curses. The pattern repeats across Hittite territory. In Sarissa, a sanctuary to the sun goddess Arina was found with its ceremonial axes driven blade first into the floor, a practice never seen in normal closures. Even more telling were the traces of quicklime spread across doorways, a substance the Hittites associated with purification, suggesting frantic last attempts to contain something before fleeing. But here's what makes this myth more than just a cautionary tale. Dendrochronology dates these abandonments to periods of political collapse when the state couldn't maintain distant temples. The curse may have been ecological fallout, neglected sites attracting vermin or toxic mold, interpreted as supernatural punishment. A tablet from Tapika describes fleeing priests plagued by invisible teeth, later identified as fleas from rodent infestations in decaying grain offerings. Modern science reveals an even darker layer. Soil samples from these temples show elevated levels of ergot fungus, which grows on spoiled rye and causes hallucinations, the same compound behind medieval dancing plagues. Suddenly, accounts of shrieking statues and bleeding walls take on new meaning. The Hittites weren't just documenting divine anger, they were recording very real neurological horrors unleashed when sacred spaces fell into disrepair. Yet the myth's true brilliance lies in its social function. By framing neglect as a cosmic crime, the Hittites created a self-reinforcing system of temple maintenance. A vassal treaty from Ugarit warns that failing to supply priests would invite the curse home. And sure enough, sites under treaty protection show no signs of the ritual destruction found elsewhere. The abandoned temples weren't just casualties of collapse, they were object lessons, their ruins standing as monuments to the consequences of broken promises. What began as a supernatural story ends up being something far more profound, an ancient blueprint for institutional survival. The Hittites understood that faith, like architecture, requires constant upkeep, and their myths held up a mirror showing what happened when that duty was forgotten. The cracks in those altars weren't just signs of wrath, they were the gods' final warning etched in stone for eternity. High above the Hittite world, where the sky met the divine, there moved a wonder unlike any other. The flying throne of the Sky Father, a chariot of fire that needed no earthly path. Ancient tablets describe this celestial vehicle with startling precision. Wheels of spinning light that left no tracks, a roar like 1,000 storms, and the uncanny ability to vanish into the clouds at will. But what's truly striking isn't just the vivid imagery, it's how closely these accounts mirror so-called UFO encounters from other ancient cultures. The Egyptian sky boat of Ra, the Vedic Vimanas, even Ezekiel's biblical chariot, all share eerie parallels with the Hittite descriptions. Were these cultures witnessing the same inexplicable phenomena, or was there something deeper at play? The key to unraveling this myth lies in its astronomical details. Tablets from Hattusa claim the throne appeared most often during the dog star's anger, a phrase scholars now link to the heliacal rising of Sirius, a period when meteors and comets were historically more visible. One fragment even notes that the throne scattered embers across the night, a description that perfectly matches the debris trail of a comet. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. The Hittites didn't just passively observe these events, they tracked them. Cuneiform tablets from Telepinu contain complex calculations predicting celestial appearances decades in advance, suggesting their sky chariot might have been a sophisticated metaphor for predictable cosmic phenomena. Yet some details defy easy explanation. The myth specifies that the throne's light bent like reeds in wind, an observation that aligns unnervingly with modern accounts of atmospheric refraction during meteor entries. Even more perplexing are the ritual instructions for summoning the Sky Father. Priests were to burn a specific blend of resins that, when recreated by chemists, produced a dense ionized smoke, a substance known to interact with electrical charges in the upper atmosphere. Could the Hittites have been attempting to influence or communicate with whatever they perceived as divine transport? The archaeological record adds another layer. Excavations at Illuyanka uncovered a ceremonial platform aligned with known comet trajectories, its surface etched with grooves resembling the spinning wheels described in the myth. Nearby, a cache of meteoritic iron fragments was found wrapped in linen alongside a tablet warning of the Sky Father's unbridled power. This wasn't just worship, it was meticulous documentation. When other cultures depicted flying chariots as purely symbolic, the Hittites embedded their accounts with testable observations. Perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of this myth is its legacy. Centuries after the Hittite Empire fell, travelers along the Silk Road carried tales of fire carts to China, where similar descriptions emerged in Taoist texts. The thread connecting these accounts suggests something far more profound than isolated folklore. Whether the Sky Father's throne was a comet, a plasma phenomenon, or something else entirely, one thing is certain: the Hittites weren't just telling stories. They were recording the heavens with an accuracy that still challenges our understanding of ancient science, and blurring the line between myth and astronomy in ways we're only beginning to decipher. The goddess Inara didn't just defeat her enemies, she outsmarted them with a contract. In one of the most cunning myths of the Hittite pantheon, the warrior goddess lures the demonic Illuyanka and his brood into a feast, plying them with wine until they're drunk and vulnerable. Then comes the twist: she convinces them to swear an unbreakable blood oath of loyalty, only to later use that very pledge to orchestrate their destruction. At first glance, it's a classic trickster tale until you compare it to the actual treaty tablets unearthed at Hattusa and realize the Hittites were encoding real-world diplomacy into divine narrative. The parallels between myth and statecraft are too precise to ignore. Surviving treaties between Hittite kings and their vassals follow an almost identical structure to Inara's trap. Lavish gifts to set the stage, ceremonial drinking to lower defenses, then the sudden introduction of binding oath reinforced with blood rituals. One particularly well-preserved treaty with the coastal kingdom of Ugarit even includes a clause where the vassal king must drink from a cup mixed with his own blood, just as the demons drank Inara's wine. The consequences for breaking these oaths mirrored the myth exactly. Tablets warn of the gods, reversing the oath's path back into the breaker's throat, a phrase that chillingly matches Inara's curse as the demons choke on their own pledged loyalty. But the brilliance of this myth lies in its psychological warfare. Like Inara's feast, Hittite treaties weren't just legal documents, they were theatrical performances designed to overwhelm the senses. Archaeologists have found evidence of treaty signings held in temple courtyards draped with blood-red banners, where the scent of roasting meats and spiced wine would have enveloped participants. A recently deciphered tablet from Alalak describes how foreign envoys were seated beneath towering statues of oath gods, their eyes inlaid with obsidian to create the unsettling illusion of being watched. This wasn't just pageantry, it was a calculated recreation of Inara's strategy, using atmosphere and ritual to imprint the terms deep in the signer's psyche. The darkest insight comes from forensic analysis of these tablets. Using multispectral imaging, scholars detected traces of actual blood in the clay of several treaty documents, likely from the touch the throat ritual mentioned in accompanying texts, where parties pressed bloody fingers to their necks while swearing. Even more revealing are the curses themselves, which escalate in violence exactly like Inara's revenge. A treaty with the Hayasa people progresses from generic plagues to shockingly specific threats. As a grapevine withers when cut, so shall your lineage dry up in one generation. This wasn't mere boilerplate, it was contractual storytelling, weaving the signer's fate into a mythological framework they couldn't escape. What makes Inara's myth revolutionary is how it exposes the Hittites' understanding of power's theatrical dimension. Their diplomats weren't just negotiators, they were myth-makers, crafting agreements that resonated on a primal level. When a vassal king broke faith, he wasn't just violating terms, he was replaying the demon's fatal mistake, stepping into a story where the ending was already written. The genius wasn't in the law, but in making the law feel inevitable, as ancient and inescapable as the gods themselves. Small wonder the Hittite Empire endured for centuries while rivals fractured. They didn't just rule by force, but by turning politics into sacred drama where every treaty carried the weight of myth. The legend sounds impossible, a city rising from empty plains in a single day, its walls towering before the sun could set. Yet this exact claim appears in Hittite temple inscriptions, describing how the gods themselves erected Sarissa in the blink of a divine eye. For years, scholars dismissed it as pure hyperbole until they started mapping the city's foundations and uncovered engineering secrets that make the myth feel uncomfortably plausible. Sarissa wasn't built by gods, but its construction methods were so advanced they might as well have been. Take the stonework. The city's defensive walls used a technique called Cyclopean masonry, where massive limestone blocks were fitted together without mortar, their joints so precise you couldn't slip a blade between them. What's staggering isn't just the precision, it's the speed. Experiments using replica Bronze Age tools show a team of 50 workers would need months to dress and position just one of these multi-ton stones. Yet Hattus's archives list Sarissa's completion in under 2 years, a timeline that implies either thousands of laborers working in perfect sync or something more innovative. The answer might lie in a set of mysterious basalt rollers found near the site, grooved to fit ropes in a way that suggests a pulley system far ahead of its time. But the real smoking gun is water. Sarissa's planners didn't just build a city, they moved a river. geological surveys reveal the original bed of the nearby stream was artificially diverted through a carved channel lined with waterproof bitumen, a technique not seen elsewhere until Roman aqueducts a millennium later. Even more impressively, the entire water system was gravity-fed from a hidden reservoir in the hills, its sluice gates engineered to millimeter tolerances. When you realize this allowed continuous construction without waiting for mortar to cure, the one-day myth starts to make sense not as literal truth, but as cultural memory of unprecedented efficiency. The most compelling evidence comes from Hattusa's famous tunnel. Burrowed through 200 feet of solid rock in the 13th century BCE, this passageway displays tool marks that defy conventional wisdom about Bronze Age capabilities. Petrographic analysis shows the builders used hardened bronze chisels in tandem with an unknown abrasive, possibly crushed quartz mixed with vinegar, to eat through limestone at rates matching modern diamond-tipped drills. A clay tablet near the entrance describes the work being done before the moon waned twice, an absurdly short time frame until you examine the tunnel's ingenious construction. Rather than digging straight through, workers sank vertical shafts at intervals, creating multiple access points that allowed teams to attack the rock from several directions simultaneously. What the Hittites achieved wasn't magic, it was logistics perfected to the point of legend. Their city in a day myth likely codified real feats of coordinated labor, where hundreds of specialists worked in orchestrated phases. Masons laying foundation stones still wet from the quarry, carpenters erecting roof beams pre-notched off-site, and priests conducting ritual measurements that doubled as quality control checks. A fragmentary hymn from Sarissa even mentions the tally sticks of the swift hands, possibly referencing a token-based system for tracking daily progress across work crews. The genius of this myth lies in what it reveals about Hittite ambition. Other cultures told tales of gods building cities to emphasize their insignificance, but the Hittites framed rapid construction as something humans could aspire to with divine favor. When they described walls rising like storm clouds piling high, they weren't just spinning fables, they were celebrating their own capacity to reshape the world at a pace that left contemporaries and modern engineers stunned. The city might not have been built in a day, but the myth endures because it captures an essential truth. For the Hittites, impossible was just another problem waiting to be outmaneuvered. At the crossroads of prophecy and politics stood the Arzawa oracle, whose riddles didn't just predict the future, they shaped it. Unlike the dramatic visions of Greek oracles at Delphi, this Hittite seer spoke in deliberate paradoxes, weaving answers so layered even kings struggled to unravel them. A recently deciphered tablet from Hattusa captures one such exchange. When asked if an upcoming harvest would fail, the oracle responded, "The empty granary sings while the full one sleeps." At first glance, it sounds like nonsense until you uncover the cryptographic key hidden in Hittite trade records. The empty granary was code for a specific type of barley shipment from Egypt, while sings referred to river routes blocked by seasonal floods. The oracle wasn't being vague, she was packaging military intelligence in poetic disguise. What makes these riddles revolutionary is their dual purpose. On the surface, they preserve the mystery expected of divine communication, but beneath the imagery lay precise diplomatic data camouflaged against spies. A breakthrough came when linguists noticed the oracle's favorite metaphors, storms, arrows, and weaving, matched terminology in Hittite cipher tablets. The phrase, "a storm with two eyes," once thought to describe divine wrath, actually warned of twin rebellions in vassal cities Aleppo and Carchemish. Even the rhythms of her speech held meaning. By analyzing syllable patterns across prophecies, researchers found they aligned with the numerical coding system used in Hittite border reports, a way to embed troop counts or supply lists within verse. Archaeology adds another layer to the puzzle. At the ruins of Arzawa's oracle temple, excavators found a chamber lined with peculiar acoustic tiles. When reconstructed, they amplified certain frequencies while dampening others, creating zones where only fragments of speech were audible. This wasn't just theatrics, it was information control. A visiting envoy might hear only part of a prophecy, while priests in the inner circle received the full message. The most striking evidence: clay decoder discs discovered in nearby administrative buildings, their concentric rings matching keyword substitutions in oracle texts. The brilliance of this system becomes clear when examining crisis responses. During a Mitanni border dispute, the oracle declared, "The lion's shadow grows when the sun flees west." Contemporary military dispatches reveal this triggered a troop redeployment, not toward the eastern front as expected, but to secure western grain stores. The lion was Mitanni's emblem, shadow meant spies, and sun west indicated sunset trade routes vulnerable to sabotage. By the time enemies decoded the riddle, the Hittites had already acted. Yet the oracle's greatest legacy might be how she transformed ambiguity into a weapon. In a world where kings demanded certainty, her riddles forced rulers to confront complexity, to weigh multiple interpretations before acting. A shattered tablet from Ugarit preserves her most famous warning: "Truth wears two faces and the wise king polishes both." It's a lesson that resonates far beyond antiquity. In an age of information overload, perhaps we could use more oracles not to obscure truth, but to teach us how to hold its contradictions. When pestilence swept through Hattusa, the Hittites didn't just pray, they negotiated. Their myths reveal a startlingly pragmatic approach to disease, where plague deities weren't mindless destroyers but shrewd dealmakers. Take the dual myths of Kamrusepa and Gulses, goddesses who presided over sickness and healing. Tablets describe them sitting across from mortal priests in temple courtyards, haggling over the terms of outbreaks end like merchants in a bazaar. One particularly vivid account from the reign of Mercilli Roman II details how the king himself brokered a treaty with the plague gods after an epidemic killed his father, offering gold statues, land grants, and even adjustments to temple rituals in exchange for lifting the sickness. This wasn't just storytelling, it was a reflection of the Hittites' emerging understanding of contagion as something that could be managed, if not fully controlled. The parallels to their medical texts are uncanny. Excavated physician handbooks from Sapanu or prescribed treatments that mirror the myth's bargaining logic. For the breath of the plague god, priests were instructed to isolate victims in ventilated reed huts, a primitive quarantine protocol. Even more striking are the counteroffer rituals where healers would expose patients to diluted pus from survivors, an early form of inoculation hinted at in both medical and mythological texts. The goddess Kamrusepa's famous compromise, "take 1 in 10 but spare the rest," directly correlates to public health measures found in royal decrees, where villages were ordered to send every 10th household to pest houses during outbreaks. What makes these myths revolutionary is how they frame disease not as divine punishment, but as a transactional relationship. While other ancient cultures saw plagues as inscrutable acts of the gods, the Hittites treated them like diplomatic crises. A recently deciphered tablet from Kizzuwatna even includes a clause where priests promise to cleanse the gutters monthly if Gulses refrains from striking children, a clear link between sanitation and divine appeasement. Modern epidemiologists were stunned to find these texts reference invisible creatures in spoiled water, a concept predating germ theory by 3 millennia. The archaeological record seals the connection. At the Temple of Lycina, excavators uncovered ceramic pipes designed to separate clean and waste water, their installation coinciding with a period when plague myth shifted emphasis from bargaining to prevention. Even the deity's iconography evolved. Early depictions show Kamrusepa holding scales to weigh lives, while later images present her with a broom and basin. The message is clear: the Hittites were moving from reactive pleas to proactive hygiene. These myths didn't just explain sickness, they shaped public policy. When vassal states reported outbreaks, Hittite officials didn't send only priests, they dispatched treaty scribes to negotiate containment terms. One such agreement with the town of Hakme survives intact, its clauses requiring regular street cleaning in exchange for the goddess turning her face away. It's a breathtaking glimpse into how mythology could drive societal change, blending spiritual belief with emerging science. The plague god's bargains weren't just stories, they were blueprints for survival, proving even in antiquity, humanity's best defense against chaos wasn't blind faith, but the courage to sit at the table with the darkness and deal. Among the most curious figures in Hittite mythology stands a deity unlike any other, the silver-handed thief, a god who lost his right hand in a failed robbery, yet continued his craft with a gleaming prosthetic. This wasn't just a whimsical tale, it was a mirror held up to one of history's most progressive legal systems. Excavations at Hattusa have uncovered cuneiform tablets detailing laws mandating prosthetic limbs for amputees, complete with stipulations about materials and craftsmanship. The myth and the legal codes intertwine in ways that force us to rethink ancient attitudes toward disability, punishment, and second chances. The story begins with the thief god breaking into the celestial treasury, only to have his hand severed by a falling bronze gate. But here's where it diverges from typical crime and punishment narratives. Instead of exile or eternal torment, the other gods take pity on him, commissioning a master smith to forge a replacement hand from silver and lapis lazuli. What sounds like divine mercy takes on startling significance when you examine Hittite legal archives. Law number 37 from the Hittite Code specifies that if a builder's negligence causes a collapse that maims someone, the builder must provide a hand of equal function crafted from precious metals. The parallels are too exact to dismiss as coincidence. Archaeological finds bring this myth to life. At Illuyanka, a burial site yielded a skeleton with a bronze cuff where the right forearm should have been, its interior lined with leather straps for attachment. Nearby lay a tablet describing it as the hand of restitution, confirming these weren't just ceremonial objects but functional aids. Even more telling are the workshop ruins at Kanish, where molds for prosthetic fingers were found alongside receipts for silver shipments, direct evidence of state-funded disability care. The implications for disability studies are profound. While Mesopotamian laws like Hammurabi's Code punished bodily harm with retaliatory mutilation, the Hittites focused on restoration. Their myths and laws shared a philosophy. Impairment wasn't the end of participation in society, but a challenge to be met with ingenuity. The silver-handed thief didn't retire after his injury. He adapted, becoming a patron of craftsmen who worked with different hands, a phrase appearing in guild records to describe artisans with disabilities. What makes this myth revolutionary is how it reflects lived experience. Temple reliefs show the thief god using his silver hand to pick divine locks, its articulated fingers capable of precise movement. Experimental archaeologists have recreated these prosthetics using period-appropriate techniques, proving they weren't just symbolic. The bronze and silver versions could grip tools, hold cups, even weave textiles. A recently translated apprenticeship contract from Hattusa mentions training, those whose hands the gods reshaped, suggesting vocational rehabilitation programs far ahead of their time. The thief's story doesn't end with his redemption. Later tablets describe him teaching other disabled deities to remake their paths, a metaphor echoed in royal decrees ordering ramps built at temples for wheelchair users. This wasn't just mythology, it was social policy wrapped in sacred narrative. When the Hittites told of a thief who turned his curse into a gift, they weren't just spinning fables. They were encoding a radical truth that humanity isn't defined by perfect bodies, but by the ability to adapt, create, and persist no matter what the gods take away. The ground beneath the Hittites didn't just shake, it rose up and walked. Their myths speak of a furious mountain deity named Hapantali, who would stretch his stony limbs when angered, causing the earth to buckle and villages to vanish beneath landslides. At first glance, this seems like classic anthropomorphism, until you compare temple inscriptions with seismic records from Hittite vassal states. A cache of letters from the city of Ura describes the mountain striding forward like a bull during an earthquake in 1290 BC, while contemporary geological surveys show fresh fault scarps appearing that exact year near the settlement. What makes this myth revolutionary is its precision. The Hittites didn't just personify disasters, they documented them with startling accuracy. Tablets from Hattusa's royal archives list settlements destroyed by Hapantali's footsteps, corresponding to known earthquake zones along the Anatolian fault line. One particularly vivid account describes how the mountain god tore his cloak, a phrase that aligns perfectly with modern terminology for surface ruptures. Even more telling are the ritual precautions temples built near active faults often had their foundations set in alternating layers of stone and flexible timber, an early form of seismic isolation that mirrors the myth's advice to build between the mountain's fingers. The correlation between myth and geology becomes undeniable when examining vassal state treaties. A recently deciphered clay tablet from Kizzuwatna demands annual offerings of iron tools to quiet the mountain's bones, a practice that takes on new meaning when you discover iron deposits along fault lines in the region. Modern seismologists confirm these areas release telluric currents before quakes, currents detectable with simple iron instruments. Were the Hittites unconsciously placating the very forces they measured? Perhaps the most chilling evidence comes from construction records at Illuyanka. The city's cyclopean walls zigzag at precise 15-degree angles, a design that happens to be highly earthquake-resistant. A fragmented hymn found nearby explains the layout as following: the path of the sleeping giant's breath, suggesting the Hittites observed how seismic waves traveled across different topographies. Their myths weren't just stories, they were survival manuals written in the language of the sacred. When later civilizations described earthquakes as random acts of gods, the Hittites were already reading the land's warnings. Their walking mountain wasn't mere superstition, it was a brilliant fusion of observation and narrative, allowing them to live alongside forces that destroyed less attentive cultures. In their world, the earth didn't just move, it spoke, and those wise enough to listen could hear its footsteps coming long before they felt the tremors. The night sky wasn't just a canvas for the Hittites, it was a battleground where divine beasts clashed. One myth describes the bull of heaven not as a passive constellation, but as a living, rampaging force that once tore free from the stars to punish mortals for their arrogance. Tablets from Hattusa recount how this celestial beast lowered its horns to the earth, goring cities and drinking rivers dry until the storm god Teshub wrestled it back into the heavens. What reads like pure mythology transforms into something far more concrete when you examine the star charts carved into Yazilikai's sacred rocks. These ancient astronomical reliefs don't just depict Taurus as we know it, they show the constellation mid-charge, with exaggerated horns pointed downward as if plunging toward Earth. The alignment is too precise to dismiss. During the spring equinox in the 13th century BC, the bull's celestial position matched exactly with the carving's orientation, its horns appearing to touch the horizon where the myth said it descended. Even more compelling are the accompanying cuneiform inscriptions that label specific stars as the bull's angry eye and the bloody hoof, corresponding to Aldebaran and the Hyades cluster in modern astronomy. But the real revelation came when archaeologists cross-referenced the myth with climate data. Sediment cores from Anatolian lakes show a catastrophic drought around 1250 BC, coinciding with the period when Bull of Heaven stories proliferated in Hittite texts. Pollen samples reveal sudden shifts from oak forests to drought-resistant juniper vegetation, changes the myth eerily predicts by describing how the bull's breath burned away the green crowns of trees. This wasn't just star lore, it was ecological memory encoded in celestial metaphor. The genius of this myth lies in its multidimensional warning system. By linking a constellation's movements to earthly disasters, the Hittites created an early form of seasonal forecasting. When Taurus dominated the winter sky, priests knew to prepare for dry springs. Temple archives from Sapanuwa contain ration lists that spiked during Taurus prominence, proving these stories directly influenced resource management. A recently deciphered Star Priest's Manual even outlines rituals to perform when certain stars aligned with the bull's horns, timed to coincide with known periods of seismic activity in the region. What appears at first as a simple monster tale reveals itself as an intricate blend of astronomy, meteorology, and crisis preparedness. The Bull of Heaven wasn't merely a constellation, it was a divine barometer, its mythic rampages mapping onto real environmental patterns. When modern scientists recently overlaid Yazilikai's star charts with climate reconstructions, they found something astonishing. Every major drought period for 2 centuries aligned with the bull's descent position in Hittite celestial reckonings. The stars didn't just tell stories, they told the future if you knew how to read them. Deep within the Hittite pantheon stood a figure who shaped history as surely as he shaped metal, the immortal blacksmith god Hasamili. Unlike the tempestuous storm deities or earth-shaking giants, this divine craftsman worked in secrecy, forging weapons that never dulled an armor no blade could pierce. The myths describe his workshop as a cavern lit by eternal fires, where hammers rang with supernatural precision. But what's truly fascinating isn't just the legend, it's how closely it mirrors the Hittites' very real, revolutionary mastery of iron, a technological leap that gave them an edge over every rival empire. Archaeological evidence reveals why Hasamili's myth took root. At the royal forge sites near Hattusa, metallurgists have uncovered furnaces capable of reaching temperatures over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, unheard of in the Bronze Age. These weren't simple hearths, they were sophisticated vertical shaft furnaces with clay tires that blasted air into the flames, mimicking the myth's breath of the god. Even more telling are the iron daggers found in royal tombs, their blades still untarnished after millennia. Metallographic analysis shows a carbon content consistent with early steel, proving the Hittites weren't just working iron. They were hardening it through techniques that wouldn't become widespread for another 500 years. The connection between myth and technology becomes undeniable when you examine Hasamili's sacred tools. Temple reliefs depict him wielding a 2-headed hammer strikingly similar to the stone mallets found at ironworking sites, used for hot forging without metal-on-metal contact that could contaminate the ore. Ritual texts specify that only priests could touch the god's anvil, a phrase that takes on new meaning when you discover the anvils themselves massive basalt blocks with magnetic properties, allowing smiths to test iron purity by seeing if filing stuck. This wasn't just ritual, it was quality control disguised as religion. What sets the Hittites apart is how they encoded their metallurgical secrets into sacred narrative. When myths describe Hasamili quenching blades in the blood of the mountain, they're referencing actual quenching techniques using mineral-rich spring water from volcanic regions. Tablets warn against working iron during the moon's dark week, coinciding with periods of high humidity that could introduce flaws in the metal. The immortal blacksmith wasn't just a story, he was a vessel for preserving trade secrets, his divine status ensuring techniques passed down unchanged for generations. The global impact of this symbiosis between myth and metal can't be overstated. While neighboring cultures struggled with brittle wrought iron, Hittite smiths produced weapons so superior Egyptian pharaohs begged for them in diplomatic letters. A recently deciphered tablet from Amarna even complains about Hittite traders demanding gold equal to the blade's weight, confirming their reputation for indestructible arms. Yet the true testament to Hasamili's legacy lies in the battlefield. At the famous siege of Kadesh, Hittite charioteers armed with iron-tipped spears shattered bronze weapons like pottery, a tactical advantage immortalized in both victory stelae and the refrain of prayers to the smith god. What you harden, no force can soften. Perhaps the most poignant evidence comes from the fall of the empire itself. When Hittite cities burned during the Bronze Age collapse, invaders systematically dismantled the forges but left the temples to Hassamili untouched, a silent acknowledgement that some knowledge was too sacred to destroy. Centuries later, Greek poets would speak of Hephaestus and his magical creations, never realizing they were echoing a much older tradition born in Anatolian workshops. The immortal blacksmith's greatest trick wasn't crafting unbreakable weapons. It was weaving science so seamlessly into story that his lessons outlasted empires. Among the most unsettling figures in Hittite mythology lurks Pazuzu, not just a demon but a devourer of dreams themselves. This wasn't some vague spectral menace. Temple texts describe it with chilling specificity. A creature with matted fur, elongated fingers that could seep through walls, and most horrifying of all, a mouth on its stomach that consumed not flesh but the very visions of sleepers. While Pazuzu would later rise to infamy in Mesopotamian lore as a wind demon, its origins in Hattus's archives reveal something far more intimate, a predator that didn't just haunt the night, but fed on the mind's vulnerability between waking and sleep. The genius of the Hittite interpretation lies in its psychological acuity. Unlike later cultures that framed Pazuzu as a bringer of disease, their rituals recognized nightmares as a distinct phenomenon requiring specialized defenses. Excavations at the Temple of Nerek uncovered sleep steels, clay tablets placed beneath pillows inscribed with spells that read like ancient cognitive behavioral therapy. One particularly well-preserved example instructs the dreamer to visualize Pazuzu's fingers as ropes of sand that dissolve upon touching moonlight, a technique startlingly similar to modern exposure therapy for night terrors. What cements Pazuzu's uniqueness is how the Hittites localized its threat. While Babylonian amulets depicted the demon as a generalized force, Hittite artifacts show regional variations. A trove of protective charms from the mountainous Pala territory portrays Pazuzu with goat-like hooves, reflecting local fears of high-altitude sleep apnea. Coastal settlements near Yora fashioned clay effigies of the demon with gill-like ridges, linking nightmare attacks to the sound of waves. This wasn't superstition, it was early medical anthropology, adapting a myth to address environment-specific sleep disturbances. The ritual countermeasures reveal even deeper sophistication. At Sapanua's sanctuary, archaeologists found a dream trap chamber where priests would sleep after consuming a psychoactive honey mixture. All inscriptions describe the process. The drugged clerics would intentionally summon nightmares, then dictate their visions to scribes while semi-conscious. These accounts were then analyzed for patterns, creating what might be history's first sleep study database. A fragmentary text labels certain recurring images of falling, drowning, tooth loss as Pazuzu's favorite flavors, indicating an early grasp of universal dream motifs. The demon's lasting influence emerges when we compare artifacts across centuries. Early Hittite Pazuzu figurines clutch stone tablets later identified as cuneiform prescriptions for valerian root, a known sedative. By the empire's peak, these tablets morph into spinning wheels, a possible representation of the Ariam cycle. The most haunting evidence comes from a noblewoman's tomb at Illuyanka, where her skeletal hands clutch an amulet inscribed with what scholars first took to be a prayer. Multispectral imaging revealed it was actually a dosage chart, lunar phases correlating with instructions to increase or decrease dream-suppressing herbs based on the moon's brightness. This myth does more than terrify. It showcases the Hittites' nuanced understanding of the unconscious mind. Their Pazuzu wasn't just a monster, it was a metaphor for sleep's inherent vulnerability, giving tangible form to fears that still stir in the dark today. When modern sleep scientists study brainwaves or prescribe lucid dreaming techniques, they're walking a path first carved by Bronze Age priests who dared to confront what hunts us behind closed eyes. Deep beneath the Anatolian plains, the Hittites believed their earth god Kumar built a labyrinth so vast even the sun god's light couldn't penetrate its depths. This wasn't just poetic imagination. Recent excavations at Decode and other underground Hittite sites reveal ventilation systems and tunnel networks so sophisticated, they blur the line between myth and megalithic engineering. The labyrinth of the earth god might sound like pure symbolism until you stand in one of these subterranean cities and realize the Hittites weren't describing an underworld, they were mapping it. What makes this myth extraordinary is its precision. Temple tablets describe Kumabai's maze with breathing shafts that sing when the wind strikes them, and corridors that turn back upon themselves like a coiled serpent. These aren't vague metaphors, they're technical specifications. At Decode, archaeologists uncovered precisely that. A 12-story underground complex with 53 ventilation shafts producing harmonic tones in certain winds, and helical staircases designed to disorient invaders. Even the myths claim that no two paths look alike. Checks out infrared scans show the Hittites deliberately varied wall textures and ceiling heights throughout tunnels, creating psychological barriers against pursuers. The engineering genius becomes undeniable when you examine the air circulation. Unlike later underground cities that relied on simple vertical shafts, Hittite sites feature angled ducts that harness the venturi effect, narrowing passages to accelerate airflow. A partially deciphered tablet from Kamakli even includes calculations for the god's breath rate, likely referring to airflow velocity needed to sustain large populations below ground. Modern engineers replicating these systems found they maintain near-perfect oxygen levels up to 15 meters underground, a feat unmatched until the 19th century. Here's where the myth takes a darker turn. Hittite warning inscriptions describe how Kumabai's labyrinth swallows the unwary whole, with hidden trapdoors and flooding mechanisms. At Urzkanak, excavators found exactly that: stone wheels embedded in ceilings that could be released to crush intruders, and sluice gates connected to underground aquifers. These weren't just defenses, they were psychological warfare tools. One priestly manual advises chanting specific verses to echo through the tunnels, creating the illusion of voices emerging from the walls themselves, a Bronze Age version of sonic haunting. The most chilling parallel emerges when you cross-reference the myth with Hittite military tactics. Tablets from imperial archives reveal that during sieges, entire populations would vanish underground for months, leaving invaders baffled. A letter from Egyptian pharaoh Ramses II complains about Hittite cities swallowed by the earth, long assumed to be hyperbole until LiDAR scans revealed camouflaged entrance shafts matching descriptions in Kumabai's myth. The labyrinth wasn't just a refuge, it was a strategic masterpiece, allowing the Hittites to wage guerrilla warfare from literal subterfuge. Yet the myth's true brilliance lies in its cosmological dimensions. Kumabai's labyrinth doesn't just mirror underground cities, it encodes their sacred purpose. Alignments between Decode's central shaft and the winter solstice sunrise suggest these spaces doubled as astronomical observatories. Wall carvings show priests using water-filled basalt bowls to reflect starlight down shafts, creating the effect described in texts where the heavens writhe beneath our feet. This wasn't just survival architecture, it was a mirror universe where the Hittites could walk through the inverted sky. Perhaps the most revolutionary insight comes from analyzing the labyrinth's construction myths alongside worker records. Contrary to assumptions that slaves built these complexes, payroll tablets list skilled artisans receiving premium wages in silver and lapis lazuli. The myths claim that Kumarbai grew the labyrinth from his own bones, takes on new meaning when you discover the tunnels follow natural fault lines reinforced with woven reed supports, an ancient biomimicry technique still used in modern tunneling. The Hittites didn't conquer the earth, they collaborated with it, Today, as engineers study these sites for sustainable underground habitation solutions, the labyrinth's legacy endures. When the myth warns that only those who know the god's heartbeat may leave, it's not just superstition, it's the literal truth of navigating by seismic vibrations echoing through stone. The Hittites didn't fear the dark, they mastered it, turning the earth itself into both fortress and temple, their myths serving as the original blueprints for a hidden world we're still struggling to fully comprehend. Among the most chilling warnings in Hittite mythology stands the tale of the golden statue of Zippalander, a divine idol so pure, so radiant, it drove its worshippers to madness. According to temple inscriptions, this wasn't just a sacred object, it was a test. The gods had crafted the statue from gold, unblemished by mortal fire, and any who dared claim it for themselves would find their minds unraveling like frayed rope. For centuries, this myth was dismissed as allegory until archaeologists uncovered the real gold hoards of Hattusa and realized the Hittites weren't spinning fables. They were documenting a technological mystery that still baffles metallurgists today. The evidence lies in the metal itself. Recent spectrographic analysis of Hittite royal gold reveals purity levels exceeding 99.9%, a figure impossible to achieve with Bronze Age refining techniques. Modern refiners need electrolytic processes or aqua regia to reach such levels, yet the Hittites apparently accomplished this 1200 years before those methods existed. Even more perplexing, their gold lacks the telltale traces of silver and copper found in contemporary artifacts from Egypt or Mesopotamia. It's as if they sourced their gold from some impossibly pure deposit, or new purification secrets lost to history. This isn't just a materials mystery, it's a theological one. The myth specifies that the cursed statue was made from the tears of the sun god, a phrase that takes on eerie significance when you examine Hittite mining records. Tablets from the silver-rich Mount Pashkiwati describe workers extracting gold from quartz veins using a technique called the god's sweat, pouring boiling vinegar over ore to separate precious metal from stone. But here's the catch: vinegar alone can't explain the purity. Some scholars now suspect the Hittites discovered an organic compound, perhaps from a rare plant, that acted as a natural electrolytic agent. A broken alchemical text from Kizzuwatna mentions the red vine that eats metal, possibly referring to a now extinct species of hyperaccumulator plant capable of bioleaching impurities. The myth's warnings about madness gain unsettling credence when you trace the gold's journey. Chemical signatures match artifacts found as far away as Troy and Mycenae, always appearing in elite burials, often accompanied by skeletal remains showing signs of degenerative brain conditions. A warrior prince's tomb at Illuyanka contained a gold diademed skull with bone lesions consistent with chronic heavy metal exposure. Could the curse have been mercury poisoning from refining processes? Laboratory tests on Hittite goldsmith tools reveal mercury residues 10 times higher than safe levels. What unfolds is a story far more complex than simple divine punishment. The Hittites may have encoded very real dangers into their myths, warnings about the costs of their own technological prowess. When the myth describes craftsmen losing their shadows after working the sacred gold, it parallels modern accounts of mercury vapor exposure causing loss of peripheral vision. Even the statues described affects victims' hearing. The laughter of unseen children match symptoms of erethism, the Mad Hatter's disease caused by mercury toxicity. The genius of this myth lies in its duality. It served as both a deterrent against greed and a safety manual for metallurgists. Ritual texts prescribe fasting and milk consumption for gold workers, practices we now know can mitigate heavy metal absorption. A temple relief at Yazilikaya shows priests presenting gold while wearing what appear to be primitive respirators made from layered linen. This wasn't just ceremony, it was Bronze Age occupational health protocol wrapped in sacred narrative. Perhaps the most profound lesson comes from tracking the gold's final journey. As the Hittite Empire collapsed, their ultra-pure gold vanished from the archaeological record, only to reappear centuries later in Phrygian tombs, then Lydian coinage, each time with declining purity. The myth's true curse wasn't madness but lost knowledge. Like Icarus flying too close to the sun, the Hittites had reached heights of metallurgy they couldn't sustain, leaving behind golden whispers of what might have been. Their statues may have crumbled, but their warnings echo through time. Some gifts from the gods come with hidden chains. The most chilling prophecy in Hittite history didn't come from a temple oracle or royal seer. It spilled from the lips of a nameless prophetess wandering the drought-cracked streets of Hattusa. Tablets recovered from the empire's final years recount how this woman, clad in tattered linen and ashes, stood before the Lion Gate and shouted warnings no one wanted to hear. She spoke of rivers running backward, of grain silos echoing like tombs, and most hauntingly, of a great darkness that would swallow the land between one harvest and the next. For decades, historians dismissed her as a madwoman until climate scientists drilled into Anatolian lakebeds and discovered she'd been right all along. The prophetess's visions align with paleoclimate data with uncanny precision. Sediment cores from Lake Van reveal a catastrophic dry period beginning around 1200 BC, exactly when the Hittite capital's records grow increasingly desperate. Pollen samples show oak forest suddenly replaced by drought-resistant juniper, mirroring her warning that the trees will forget their leaves. Even her seemingly impossible claim about rivers finds startling validation. Isotope analysis of ancient Euphrates tributaries confirms some channels did briefly reverse flow as water tables plummeted. What makes her prophecies revolutionary isn't just their accuracy, it's their specificity. While other seers spoke in vague doom, she gave measurable thresholds. When the barley stands no taller than a child's hand, the gods will close their eyes. Agricultural records from Hattusa's final years show exactly this: stunted grain under 6 inches tall, their withered stalks preserved in sealed storage jars. A recently deciphered tax ledger lists yields dropping 70% in just 5 years, culminating in the grim note, "No harvest to measure this season." The prophetess's most derided vision, "Kings will trade their crowns for sacks of barley," became horrifying reality. Diplomatic letters from Ugarit reveal Hittite nobles begging Egypt for grain shipments, offering royal seals as collateral. One desperate tablet from King Sepululiuma Roman II even proposes exchanging sacred bronze statues for any sustenance. Archaeology confirms this humiliation. A storeroom in Tahantasa held 3 discarded gold diadems stacked beside empty grain baskets, exactly as described in the prophetess's final warning before she vanished from the records. Modern science reveals how she might have known. Analysis of her described symptoms, visions preceded by metallic tastes and trembling hands, suggests she suffered from selenium poisoning, common in drought-stricken areas where malnutrition drives people to eat toxic drought-resistant plants. These same plants accumulate heavy metals which can trigger temporary clairvoyant-like neurological effects. The prophetess wasn't just foreseeing collapse, her body was literally metabolizing the empire's ecological downfall. Her true legacy lies in the fragments she left behind. Unlike other Bronze Age prophecies fixated on gods and kings, her warnings centered on mundane details: the weight of a loaf, the color of irrigation mud, the flight patterns of swallows. In doing so, she created history's first documented climate forecast, not written in star charts or omens, but in the quiet language of a collapsing ecosystem. When she cried, "The land itself will forget us," she wasn't speaking metaphorically. She was reading the Earth's memory of what came before and its terrible certainty of what would follow. The Storm God Teshub wasn't the only deity who ruled the skies, at least, not if you ask the priests of Kamani. Hidden in the archives of this southern Hittite vassal state lies a radical retelling of the cosmic order, where the lesser-known storm god Perwa challenged Teshub's supremacy in a celestial duel that mirrored very earthly power struggles. According to tablets excavated near modern-day Konya, Purwa didn't just contest Teshub's authority, he stole the sacred storms themselves, hoarding the rains over his mountain stronghold until crops withered across the empire. What reads like divine drama transforms into political allegory when you cross-reference these myths with diplomatic letters from the same period, revealing a high-stakes tug of war between central authority and rebellious provinces. The Kamani version of events drips with subversion. Purwa isn't some upstart demigod, he's framed as the rightful heir to the Storm Throne, wrongfully displaced by Teshub's northern treachery. His weapons aren't mere lightning bolts, but hail-sharp ice daggers forged in high-altitude tempests, explicitly linked to the real glacial peaks surrounding Kamani. Even the battlegrounds carry coded meaning. One clash occurs at the Silver Gorge, a location modern geologists have identified as the Taurus Mountains' rich silver mines, the economic lifeline of the dissident South. This isn't just mythology, it's rebellion in sacred drag. Contrast this with the official Hattusa-sanctioned myth, preserved on gold leaf tablets beneath the storm god's temple. Here, Purwa appears as a petulant thief, snatching clouds like a bandit stealing sheep, until Teshub unleashes his sacred bulls to trample the impostor beneath the rivers of heaven. The subtext screams through the poetry. A royal decree from Sapaluliyama I unearthed nearby threatens southern cities with drought if they withhold silver tributes, using eerily similar phrasing about choking the streams of generosity. Archaeology exposes the real-world stakes. At the disputed border city of Tuwana, excavators found twin storm god altars, one facing north toward Hattusa with classic Teshub iconography, the other oriented south toward Kamani, its carvings deliberately chiseled away. Beneath the vandalism, traces remain of a horned helmet matching Purwa's described headpiece in southern texts. Even more telling are the weather vane artifacts recovered nearby. While northern sites feature simple directional rods, Tuwana's are elaborate bronze serpents that twist to face conflicting wind patterns depending on which storm god's temple they stood nearest. The genius of these dueling myths lies in their meteorological accuracy. Northern versions insist Teshub's rains come from the Black Sea, borne on northeast winds, a fact confirmed by modern climate studies of Anatolian precipitation patterns. Southern counter-myths credit Purwa with channeling Mediterranean storms through mountain passes, another demonstrable weather phenomenon. These weren't just competing theologies, they were early climate models weaponized by rival priestly factions. A fragmentary agricultural manual from Samuha even advises farmers to follow the local god's winds when planting, proving these stories directly influenced crop cycles and, by extension, regional autonomy. When the empire finally collapsed, the weather wars outlived it. Centuries after Hattusa burned, Lycian inscriptions still invoked Purwa as the true thunderer, while Phrygian storm rituals borrowed elements from both traditions. The ultimate irony, modern Turkish folklore retains echoes of this divine rivalry in stories of the two-faced storm, where competing winds battle over villages, proof that some conflicts, whether celestial or political, never truly dissipate. They just change form, rumbling through time like distant thunder over contested lands. Legends speak of an army that marched without footsteps, warriors who flickered like candle flames in the wind, the phantom soldiers of Kizzuwatna. Hittite tablets describe these ghostly battalions appearing at dusk, their spectral chariots gliding across battlefields to strike terror into enemy ranks before vanishing at dawn. For centuries, these accounts were dismissed as battlefield hallucinations or poetic exaggeration until archaeologists unearthed the chariot reliefs at Illuyanka and realized the myth might be hiding a revolutionary military secret in plain sight. The key lies in the Hittite three-man chariot teams, a tactical innovation unseen elsewhere in the Bronze Age. While Egyptian and Mesopotamian forces relied on two-person crews, a driver and an archer, the Hittites added a third warrior shielded by elaborate wicker armor. Temple carvings show these formations moving in precise, overlapping patterns, their dust clouds and angular formations creating optical illusions against the Anatolian steppes' shifting light. Modern recreations prove the effect would have been uncanny. At certain angles and speeds, a dozen such chariots could appear as dozens more, their silhouettes fragmenting and reforming like specters in the haze. But the Phantom Army's true genius wasn't just visual deception, it was psychological warfare perfected. Military dispatches from Kadesh describe enemies fleeing at the sight of countless Hittite chariots emerging from dust storms, though contemporary records confirm their actual numbers were modest. A recently deciphered training manual from Hattusa details how charioteers were drilled to exploit terrain echoes, making wheel rumbles reverberate between canyon walls to simulate larger forces. Even the myth's vanishing at dawn holds tactical truth. Hittite scouts timed attacks for pre-dawn hours when low fog would obscure their retreat, leaving opponents convinced they'd battled apparitions. The archaeological record cements the connection between myth and military science. Excavations at Kizzuwatna's garrison site revealed a ceremonial armory containing chariot parts deliberately modified to produce eerie, fluctuating tones, bronze plates tuned to vibrate at specific frequencies when moving. A fragmented tablet lists these sounds as the voices of the dead warriors, suggesting the Hittites weaponized acoustic terror alongside visual tricks. Even more telling are the recovery pits found near battle sites, where spent arrowheads were systematically collected and reused, a practice that would make casualty counts appear impossibly low, fueling supernatural rumors. What appears as ghost story transforms into a masterclass in asymmetric warfare. The Phantom Army myth didn't just describe supernatural events, it preserved tradecraft. When later Greek historians wrote of the Hittites' invisible allies, they were unknowingly referencing these calculated perceptions. The warriors of Kizzuwatna may not have been spirits, but their legacy endures in modern military deception tactics, proving that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't steel, it's the enemy's own imagination set ablaze. The Hittites didn't just tame animals, they claimed to converse with them. Among their most enigmatic myths is the tale of the Shaman King, a figure who could decipher the tongue of beasts from the lowing of cattle to the screech of eagles. At first glance, this seems like universal folklore until you examine the veterinary tablets from Hattusa and realize these weren't just fanciful stories. They were codified observations, a blend of sacred ritual and proto-scientific zoology that reveals the Hittites' startling intimacy with the animal world. Take their treatment of horses. Military manuals from the palace archives don't just describe training techniques. They catalog over 30 distinct vocalizations, from the war neigh, a high-pitched call before charging, to the morning huff, a deep nasal exhale signaling injury. Even more remarkable are the corresponding ritual texts where priests mimic these sounds during healing ceremonies. A clay cylinder from Sapanuwa preserves one such chant, alternating between human speech and precise equine vocalizations to bridge the divine and the hooved. Modern ethologists were stunned to find these vocal patterns match actual horse distress calls recorded in Turkish herds today, suggesting the Hittites weren't guessing, they were listening with unprecedented precision. But the real breakthrough came with the discovery of the bird omen tablets at Kasara. Unlike Mesopotamian augury that interpreted random flights as signs, the Hittite system was eerily systematic. Each species' calls were transcribed using a specialized cuneiform subset, dots for short notes, wedges for sustained tones, creating what may be history's first ornithological notation system. A tablet analyzing raven cries distinguishes 6 variations of their cra sound, linking each to specific behaviors: the 2-syllable warning call for approaching predators, the raspy territorial challenge, even a guttural laughter during social play. Modern raven researchers confirmed these distinctions, with one biologist noting the Hittite descriptions are more nuanced than some contemporary field guides. The genius of these myths lies in their practical applications. When texts speak of the bear priest who could sing the hibernation hymn, they're referencing actual veterinary practices. Excavations at a temple near the Pontic Mountains uncovered a hibernation chamber lined with honeycombs, a natural sedative where priests monitored ursine heartbeats using bronze resonators pressed to the stone walls. Accounts of these rituals describe matching chant rhythms to the slowed breathing of drowsing bears, a technique modern wildlife rehabilitators unknowingly recreate when soothing traumatized animals with rhythmic humming. Perhaps the most haunting evidence comes from the shepherd's lament, a funeral stele showing a man surrounded by mourning sheep. At first dismissed as artistic license, forensic analysis of the accompanying bones revealed something extraordinary. The sheep had been buried alive in careful formation around their human keeper. Soil compaction patterns suggest they lay down peacefully rather than struggling, a behavior modern herders observe only in flocks that imprint deeply on caretakers. The myth framing this as a dialogue beyond death might be poetic, but the underlying bond it describes is undeniably real. This wasn't just shamanic posturing. The Hittites were mapping interspecies communication centuries before science had the tools to verify their insights. When priests donned wolf skins to sing with the pack, they were likely replicating canid social cues we now know as cohesion vocalizations. Their myths of understanding insects, probably born from observing ant pheromone trails, several texts mention following invisible lines to locate bee nests. Even the seemingly fantastical claim that certain shamans could quiet wasp anger aligns with modern techniques of using smoke to disrupt alarm signals. The brilliance of these traditions lies in their duality. They preserved zoological knowledge through sacred narrative while pushing observation to its limits. A broken tablet from Nerik sums it up best. The gods gave beasts no words but patterns louder than speech. In the Hittite world, the language of animals wasn't magic. It was a lexicon of behavior waiting to be decoded, one myth at a time. As flames licked the walls of Hattusa and invaders breached the Lion Gate, one figure stood untouched in the storm, the last priestess of the storm god. Her final prophecy, etched onto a clay tablet now cracked with age, didn't just predict the empire's fall. It painted a vision so visceral, so hauntingly precise, that refugees carried its echoes across the Mediterranean like a whispered curse. The great houses will breathe their last, she warned, and the people will become as ghosts walking roads even the gods have forgotten. Centuries later, letters dug from the ruins of Ugarit would prove her right in ways no one could have imagined. The priestess's words seemed like poetic doom, until archaeologists cross-referenced them with Ugaritic merchant logs. A distraught scribe in coastal Syria wrote of pale strangers arriving by ship, their skin cracked from hunger, speaking a garbled version of the Hittite language. These weren't ordinary refugees. They moved with eerie purpose, carrying clay figurines of deities Ugaritic priests didn't recognize. Most chillingly, the account notes they refused to sleep indoors, claiming, "The walls remember the fire." This mirrors the Hattusa prophecies warning that survivors would shun the touch of stone, a detail too specific to dismiss as coincidence. But the real smoking gun lies in the priestess's description of the Black Rain. She claimed it would fall for 7 days after the capital's fall, staining skin and poisoning crops. Sediment cores from central Anatolia reveal an ash layer dating to Hattusa's destruction, rich in lead and copper particles from burning temples and archives. Contemporary Egyptian medical texts even mention treating Hittite refugees for lesions matching heavy metal exposure. The myth wasn't just foretelling collapse, it was preserving environmental testimony, encoding the very chemistry of apocalypse. What makes this prophecy unique is its self-awareness. Unlike vague biblical apocalypses or Mesopotamian doom sayings, the priestess anchored her vision in tangible landmarks. She pointed to the spring that will run red, later identified as the Karakaya hot springs near Hattusa, which still carry iron oxide deposits from that period. She named the Silent Hill where the ravens won't land. Modern surveys show a mass grave site atop Bukaya, its soil acidity from decomposition still deterring birds 3 millennia later. This wasn't mystic rambling, it was eyewitness testimony disguised as divination. The most haunting parallel emerges from refugee accounts in Cyprus. A shipwrecked Hittite noble's letter, preserved in the Temple of Kishon, describes survivors seeing the faces of the dead in the waves. At first, this seemed like trauma-induced hallucination until oceanographers studied the currents off Anatolia. The combination of ashfall and a recorded algae bloom would have created bioluminescent swirls resembling human features at night. The priestess had prophesied this too: the sea will wear their smiles. Her true genius lay in weaponizing metaphor. When she declared, kings will become scribes, scribes will become beggars, she wasn't just predicting social upheaval. Bronze seals found in Syrian markets prove exiled Hittite royalty indeed took menial clerk jobs, their once proud cuneiform reduced to recording barley shipments. One such seal bears the unmistakable royal cartouch of a Hittite prince stamped onto a receipt for second-hand sandals. The prophecy's cruelest twist came true. The mighty didn't just fall, they became footnotes in their conquerors' ledgers. Modern psychology offers a startling lens for her visions. The symptoms described survivors fixating on repetitive tasks, speaking to absent loved ones align perfectly with what we now recognize as PTSD. The priestess wasn't just foreseeing collapse, she was diagnosing its psychological toll centuries before medicine had the vocabulary. Even her prediction that memory will unravel like a frayed rope finds validation in refugee pottery shards bearing half-finished glyphs, signs of literate people losing their language to trauma. This myth does more than chronicle disaster, it challenges how history remembers defeat. The priestess didn't frame the empire's end as a clean break, but as a slow unraveling where identity itself became a casualty. When Ugaritic texts speak of Hittite ghosts, they weren't describing specters but a people severed from their past, wandering between worlds. Her prophecy's greatest lesson isn't about how civilizations die, but how they haunt long after the last stone has crumbled. What if the Hittites weren't just storytellers but accidental historians? Modern researchers are tearing down the line between myth and science, uncovering startling possibilities hidden within these ancient tales. Take the legend of Teshub battling the mountain god Hapantali, the god who could stretch his stony limbs and make villages vanish. For years, scholars read this as pure metaphor. Then geologists point to the Hassan Dag volcano, which erupted catastrophically around 1600 BC, burying entire settlements under pyroclastic flows. The myth's description of the mountain's cloak tearing aligns eerily with volcanic sector collapse, where entire slopes give way in seconds. Even the timing fits. Hittite tablets mark this period as the long darkness, when ash blotted out the sun for months. But the reinterpretations grow even bolder. Could the Hittites' flying thrones and weapons of the gods hint at encounters with advanced foreign technology? A controversial theory points to meteoric iron artifacts found in Hittite royal tombs, their nickel content matching space rocks rather than terrestrial deposits. These celestial metals were worked into ceremonial daggers long before iron smelting became widespread, leading some researchers to speculate about forgotten metallurgical knowledge. The myth of Hassamili's forge, where divine weapons were tempered in starfire, takes on new weight when you examine the peculiar crystalline structure of these blades, which modern labs struggle to replicate without industrial tools. Then there's the elephant in the room. Could these myths preserve fragments of even older civilizations? The Hittites claimed their gods came from the land beyond the sea, a phrase matching descriptions of the mysterious sea peoples who ravaged the Bronze Age. Underwater archaeologists have recently identified potential pre-Hittite megalithic structures off the Anatolian coast. their massive stones bearing tool marks unlike anything from known cultures. One tablet's account of the first people who built with singing stones might refer to acoustic properties found in these submerged ruins. Certain basalt blocks emit harmonic tones when struck, a feature seen in later oracular sites. The most radical theories emerge from linguistic analysis. Certain Hittite divine names like the storm god Teshub share uncanny phonetic roots with Proto-Indo-European words for thunder, but also with Proto-Dravidian terms for metalworker. This unexpected linguistic bridge suggests cultural exchanges far older and more complex than history records. When myths speak of gods arriving from where the earth meets the sky, could they be encoding migration routes or trade networks stretching from the Indus Valley to the Aegean? Volcanologists, archaeologists, and materials scientists now collaborate to test these ideas. At the University of Chicago, researchers used plasma spectroscopy to analyze Hittite ritual objects, discovering traces of andesite, a volcanic rock absent from Anatolia but common in the Caucasus. This matches myths of the gods' northern origins while suggesting the Hittites may have preserved geological knowledge from distant lands. Similarly, the black rain described in collapse prophecies contains chemical signatures linking it to the thorough eruption, proving these stories could amalgamate real events across generations. What emerges isn't just a new reading of old tales, but a paradigm shift. These myths weren't passive folklore, they were living databases compressing observations, technologies, and disasters into narrative code. When the Hittites spoke of gods walking among them, they might have been recalling encounters with advanced seafarers or survivors of lost cities. Their divine wars could encode volcanic winters or seismic catastrophes that reshaped civilizations. Even the structure of these myths, with their cyclical battles and recurring destructions, mirrors the pattern of archaeological strata, where cultures rise and fall like characters in an epic. The implications ripple beyond academia. If these stories preserve fragments of pre-Hittite knowledge, they might hold clues to forgotten survival strategies, like the earthquake-resistant architecture encoded in labyrinth myths or the drought forecasts hidden in celestial lore. In an age of climate uncertainty, these ancient narratives take on urgent new relevance. The Hittites didn't just imagine their gods, they may have been trying to understand forces far beyond their control, leaving behind not just warnings, but tools for resilience written in the language of the sacred. The echoes of Hittite mythology didn't fade with their empire. They rippled outward, weaving themselves into the fabric of cultures as distant as the Celtic highlands and as enduring as Greek philosophy. Take the Hurrian myth of Kumarbi, the god who bit off the genitals of the sky god Anu to seize power, a story that reappears almost note for note in Hesiod's Theogony, where Kronos castrates Uranus. This isn't coincidence, it's cultural DNA. The Hittites, acting as middlemen between Mesopotamia and the Aegean, likely transmitted these narratives along the same trade routes that carried Anatolian silver and lapis lazuli. A broken tablet from Ugarit even lists Hurrian and Hittite deities alongside Greek counterparts in a bilingual glossary, proving these connections were recognized in antiquity. But the trail grows stranger. In Wales Mabinogion, the hero Lugh Lord Gifs is betrayed by his wife and transforms into an eagle, mirroring the Hittite storm god Teshub's flight as a hawk after his exile. The similarities extend to minute details. Both gods perch in trees, their feathers rotting from neglect until a divine ally rescues them. How did this motif cross 2,000 miles and a millennium? Look to the so-called Sea Peoples who ravaged the Bronze Age. DNA studies show some groups carried Anatolian ancestry, and linguistic traces in Celtic languages like the shared root tar for thunder hint at forgotten lines of transmission. Even more startling are the parallels between Hittite rituals and Greek mystery cults. The Hittite festival of the vanishing god, where priests reenacted Telepinu's disappearance by hiding a statue and wailing for its return, is eerily similar to the Eleusinian rites for Demeter and Persephone. Both involved sacred drinking vessels shaped like bulls, ecstatic dances, and the ritual proclamation, "The God is found." At Yazilikaya, reliefs show a procession of 12 underworld deities, a possible precursor to the Olympian pantheon, with Teshub's lightning bolt morphing into Zeus's iconic weapon. The most tantalizing evidence lies in iconography. A Hittite seal from Carchemish depicts a winged goddess standing on a lion, flanked by griffins, an image nearly identical to the Phrygian Cybele worshipped centuries later. When the Greeks adapted her as Re, they kept the lion throne but lost the context. Hittite texts clarify the lion symbolized the goddess's dominion over earthquakes, as felines were believed to sense tremors before humans. This wasn't arbitrary borrowing, it was the fragmentation of an interlinked theological system. Perhaps the most profound legacy lies in legal symbolism. The Hittite cursor, a sacred hunting bag representing royal power, resurfaces in Celtic Ireland as the corbolg, a magical pouch carried by kings. Both were believed to empty themselves for unworthy rulers, a metaphor for losing divine favor. Even the Norse god Odin's spear Gungnir, which never missed its mark, may descend from descriptions of the Hittite god Zababa's arrow that knows the path. These aren't scattered similarities, but the shards of a shattered mirror, reflecting a time when myths flowed as freely as trade goods across the ancient world. The Hittites didn't just vanish, they dissolved into the cultural groundwater of Eurasia. Their stories became the seeds of new traditions, mutating to fit local landscapes but retaining their core like the stubborn genetic memory of a lost civilization. When the Greeks spoke of titans or the Celts told of shape-shifting gods, they were unwittingly channeling voices from Hattusa's ruins, proof that ideas, unlike empires, never truly die. These 30 myths don't just tell stories, they shatter assumptions. What we've uncovered is a civilization that didn't merely survive the Bronze Age, they mastered it with a sophistication that rivals our own. Their storm gods weren't just symbols of fear, they were reflections of seismic knowledge encoded in sacred verse. Their divine battles mapped celestial events with eerie precision, and their rituals doubled as early scientific experiments. This isn't myth-making, it's multidisciplinary genius disguised as folklore. Consider the ripple effects. The Hittites' understanding of contagion, preserved in plague god bargains, predates germ theory by millennia. Their architectural feats, like Sarissa's near-overnight construction, reveal logistical prowess that modern engineers still struggle to replicate. Even their legal systems, woven into myths like the silver-handed thief, displayed a level of social equity unmatched in the ancient world. These aren't random legends, they're a cultural blueprint, proving that spirituality and science weren't opposing forces for the Hittites, but two sides of the same meticulously carved tablet. Yet the most unsettling question remains: if these myths hold such startling truths, what else might we be missing? The Hittites left no stone unturned, literally. They tracked comets in temple carvings, encoded metallurgy secrets in divine smith tales, and even mapped neurological conditions through demon lore. Their stories were never just entertainment, they were vessels for preserving knowledge across generations. So what happens when we apply this lens to other ancient myths? Could the flood narratives of Mesopotamia contain forgotten climate data? Might the voyages of Greek heroes chart real Bronze Age trade routes? The Hittites have handed us a key, now it's our turn to unlock the rest. As the screen fades and the echoes of Hattusa's lost voices linger, I'll leave you with this: every myth we dismiss as fantasy might be another library waiting to be read. The Hittites didn't just challenge their own time, they challenge ours. So tell me in the comments, which ancient story do you think hides the next great revelation? The answers, much like the gods of old, are closer than we think.